guys, welcome back to my channel, Shop and Read. Today I'll be doing my March wrap up. Before I get started, if you're new to this channel, please don't hesitate to subscribe down below, as well as the notification bell. And if you're new, hi, hello, I'm Stephanie. I do a lot of bookish content, and let's just get right into all the books that I read for the month of March, because it is gonna be a journey. So for March, I somehow managed to read 30 fucking books. That is insane to me. If I had just read one more book, I would have read a book a day for the month of March, which honestly is just incredible. This also means I read 9,419 pages, and out of these 30 books, I read 2 books that were 2 stars, 1 book that was 2.5 stars, 3 books that were 3 stars, 12 books that were 4 stars, and then 12 books that were 5 stars. So the quality was fucking amazing. I mean, March was honestly such a good reading month for me. I didn't realize how much I read until I calculated everything, and I was like, wow, I am floored. But because in the essence of time, I'm not going to spend like a shit ton of time going through every single book. I am going to go through every single book, but I'm not going to spend like too much time on each book individually, if that makes any sense, because 30 is a lot to get over. So anyways, the first book that I read was This Wicked Fate, which I gave 4 stars. This is the sequel and the finale to This Poison Heart duology by Kaylin Bayron. I really enjoyed this book. Like I said, I already gave this book 4 stars, and this was just a conclusion to the series. I really enjoyed it. I think it was a really great way to just end the series. If you had watched my February wrap up, I did talk about this like very briefly in there, because I had just finished this book, I think the 1st of March, so it was very fresh in my head when I had actually filmed the February wrap up, and I just really enjoyed this book. I thought the characters are great, the plot was good. I really liked the whole emphasis on mythology, because I'm a huge sucker for Greek mythology especially, and this book had a lot of that, and I was all here for that. The next book I picked up is The Mother-in-Law by Sally Hepworth. This book I gave 3 stars. This book was an interesting read to me. It's basically like a domestic thriller where it follows Lucy and her mother-in-law Diane. And Lucy had just joined the family many years ago, and she always felt that her and Diane's relationship was never the greatest. And then suddenly Diane was found dead with a suicide note. And at first the police thought this was a suicide, so they didn't really think too much about it. But then after, you know, some digging, they realized that it might have been a homicide. And so now they're trying to like uncover everything. I felt like this book had a lot of potential, but I think in the execution it was just okay. It still kept me engaged and I was still invested with the story, but I felt like at some point I was purely reading just to continue reading and just find out what really happened. It wasn't like I had to know, or it wasn't like the characters that were driving me, none of that above. I was just more like, at this point I just wanted to figure out like what happened. Like the ending was just okay. I wouldn't say it was completely surprising, because it wasn't, and I felt like the culprit behind everything, or like the conclusion behind everything, was satisfying. It just, I don't know, I just felt like I wanted something like a huge plot twist, and I didn't really deliver. Next book I picked up is Little Darlings by Melanie Golding. This book I gave 4 stars. This is another thriller novel where it follows a woman where she just gave birth to twins, and during her time in the ICU, like after birth, she encounters this like strange woman threatening to steal her kids and her baby boys. And so she has this huge fuss that happens, and investigators are like, okay, well clearly she's delusional, you know, just a lot of under medication, just, you know, high on emotions, etc. Didn't really think too much about it. And then suddenly a couple weeks later, she's out with her little baby boys, and she falls asleep. She's so tired from taking care of these little kids, and suddenly she wakes up and her kids are gone. They finally find the kids, the police finds the kid, but then when she sees them, she's like, these are not my kids. In fact, she believes that they were changed by the woman who had threatened to take her kids as like changelings. And the whole book just kind of revolves around this investigation and find out what really happened, and is she lying, is she not lying, like is this whole delusion. This book was super fascinating. Honestly, this book could have been 5 stars if it wasn't for the fact that the ending was kind of vague, and I don't know, I just feel like it's just so much build up, and then when the ending happened I was like, okay, like that was it. So which is why I bumped it down to 4 stars. But I felt like the premise was really fascinating, the lead up, the build up, like the characters, like I was very invested in what was happening, because there's just so much, and just learning more about the background and learning about the history of like the town that they're in and the lore. So yeah, overall really enjoyed this one. Just the ending was just I don't know, but yeah. The next book that I picked up is The Deck of Omens, which I gave 4 stars. I did talk about this a lot more in my series vlog, which I will link above and down below. Just go and check that out. This is the conclusion to the Devouring Grey series, and I really enjoyed the series. I reread the first book back in February, loved it, and thought it held up against, you know, a couple years of me not finishing the series. And then I picked up the sequel this month, and I liked how everything concluded. I liked the characters, I liked the plot. I thought this was a fascinating read overall. This book basically follows a small town where there are these founders, these 4 founder families, where they all gifted these like magical abilities to kind of protect the town from the Grey, which is this like alternate parallel universe that is always threatening to kind of like kill off the members in the town. And somehow these 4 founder families are the ones tasked with protecting them and keeping the Grey at bay. Obviously, the story progresses. You learn a lot more about the history and what really happened all those years ago with the founding families, and you know what their roles actually were during that time period versus now. I really enjoyed the book, guys. I really enjoyed the series. I thought it was such a fascinating like conclusion overall, and I was very satisfied. The next book I picked up is Fence Volume 3 by C.S. Packett. I'm hoping I pronounced that name correctly. This book I gave 4 stars. I really enjoyed the series, guys. I feel like this is definitely a series where I don't need to read this like immediately, because I think there's like volumes 4 and 5 out there, but I feel like every time I pick it up, it's like I never forgot what actually happened. Even though this book is very short, it's only 100 pages, like the volumes are very short in general, but somehow though I feel like every time I pick it up, I felt like I just finished the previous volume, and I'm just like sucked right back into the storyline. I really enjoy the characters. I love the whole fencing dynamic. I don't really know much about fencing, to be quite honest, but I just enjoy the sport overall in the series, and just like the dynamics between the friendships and the relationships between all the characters. I found that very fascinating, and I feel like I'm learning a lot about the fencing community overall while I'm reading this book, which also is really cool. So highly recommend this series overall. Next book I picked up is The Donut Trap by Julie Tew. Hoping you pronounced that correctly. This book I gave 3 stars. This book basically follows a woman called Jasmine Tran, where she's now graduated college and she's trying to figure out what she wants to do with her life. In the meantime though, she's helping out at her parents' donut shop, and because of her helping out a lot, she doesn't really have a ton of time or the motivation to really figure out what she wants to do with her career. At the same time though, she's getting pressure from her parents, like, what are you going to do, you know, how come you haven't found a real job yet, etc., while also putting pressure on her to, you know, continue with the family business and working there, because, you know, they're getting old, they need the help, and they're not going to like ask for outside help. So she's like faced with a lot of different hardships there. At the same time, there's also a guy called Alex that she meets, who is apparently very successful as well as very handsome, and he also speaks Chinese, which apparently is something that her parents really want. One day there's a dinner fiasco between Alex and her parents, as well as Alex's mom, and then she realized that he's probably not as perfect as she thought he was. Not only that, but he doesn't think she's perfect either. So now the two of them are just sorting things out. She's trying to get out of her donut shop situation while also trying to figure out what she actually wants to do. In the meantime, Alex also trying to figure out his situation as well. And honestly, I was here for like a good romance, and this did not really deliver. I liked the family elements to it. I thought that was, you know, it resonated with me considering I'm also Asian. I could understand where she was coming from. At the same time though, I felt like her personality just did not mesh with me at all. Like, she was, I don't want to say she was lazy per se, but she never really felt to me as someone who was very like career driven or motivated or had a lot of ambition. And I am not a big fan of people without ambition, because I'm like, everyone has the same amount of time, right? And you obviously went to a really great school and you were on the path to success, but then something happened during college and she kind of like fell off that path, but she never really recovered from it. And at some point, there were a lot of times throughout this book where I felt like she was just content being at this rut that she was in, and she just did not care. But then she would complain about how she was in that rut, and I'm like, okay, well then if you're complaining, then you should probably do something. Like, I don't really have a lot of patience for people, generally speaking, where if they complain about something but then they don't do anything about the complaint, like, then either you're complaining just for the sake of complaining or you're not actually complaining, you know? Like, it's just like your actions need to back your words. So if you don't like something, change it, you know? And so for me, I felt like she just never had the backbone to do it. She never had the ambition to do it, and it just really irked me personally. So I was not a huge fan of her. I think that really influenced my experience with this book, because characters is just a huge impact for me of how much I like books or not, and I was not a big fan of her. That being said though, because I do like the cultural aspect and the family aspect, I still give this book 3 stars. The next series that I read was Nevermore as well as Wondersmith. I gave both of them 4 stars. Honestly, I really enjoyed the series. I thought this was a great middle grade book. I've heard so many things about it. I actually really want to continue on the series, but because I just don't know when this will end or what the issue is, because I think the 3rd book and the 4th book had like a 3-year gap, and I'm like, no, I'm not going to do another giant series where there's just many years in between, and I just don't know when there will be a conclusion. So that being said, I decided not to continue on the series, even though I really enjoyed the series overall. Like, I love Morgan Crow, I love her friends, I love the adventures that she was having. I thought this was a great series, very heartwarming, very easy to read as well. So if you're looking for a really great fantasy middle grade series, I still recommend this one, even though the series might not be finished. Next book I picked up is Venko by Cherie Desmalines. This book I gave 2 stars. To be honest, I'm debating this is like a 1.5 star book instead, because this is by far the worst book. I did talk about this a lot more in one of my reading vlogs, which I'll link above and down below, as well as my quarterly best books I read for January, February, and March, which I will also link above and down below. This was the worst book I read all year so far. It was absolutely horrible. I didn't like the characters, I didn't like the writing. This book basically follows a woman called Lucky, where one day she finds this magical spoon with the word Salem on it. Turns out she is the 6th witch that this coven has been waiting for, and things kind of transpire, and now she and her grandmother Stella are on this hunt for the 7th witch to kind of close out the coven. In the meantime, there's also a witch hunter who's just trying to disrupt the coven from fully forming, and they don't really go into the reason as to why he's trying to stop them, because it seems like he's the only witch hunter left in the entire world, and he's also immortal. And so, you know, the book kind of continues and they go on this adventure, etc. And honestly, this writing style was abhorrent. I really didn't like it. I felt like it was super choppy. There was a lot of like flashbacks and forth that was not very clear. It was definitely more written for like a movie or like a screen adaptation versus a book, and I feel like the author did not write it thinking it was going to be a book, versus, because it's very different, you know, like when you write for a screenplay versus you're writing for a book, very different types of writing. And I feel like this author was more like, had more experience writing for screen adaptations versus prose, and it really showed in this book because it was just very choppy and very confusing. So I was not a fan of that. I also didn't care much for the characters. I felt like Stella was the only character that I was remotely interested in. I also hated the witch hunter. He gave off rape vibes, so trigger warnings there. Not a fan of him at all. And I don't know, I just feel like this book was just a huge fucking mess, and no one in my book club, which I also read this for, liked this book. So yeah, definitely the worst book I've read so far. Next book I picked up is In the Lives of Puppets by TJ Klune. This book I gave 4 stars. This book was a cute book. It basically follows a mismatched family of a human as well as a couple of robots. They're living by themselves, very isolated in this little forest. One day while the human is, you know, going through a bunch of debris and litter from, you know, like the cities, something happens, and now he set up some sort of signal, and now all the robots now know where they are, and before long the entire family is in danger. And so now they're going on this adventure to kind of like save the family and, you know, protect their lifestyle and whatever. And this book was cute. I feel like each book I've read from TJ Klune has gone like progressively less than amazing, because the first book I read from was House of the Cerulean Sea, which is amazing. Like, I love that book so much. It was super emotional, very poignant. I love the characters, lots of like relatable content there. And then I read his second book, which was Under the Whispering Door. That was good too, but like it just wasn't the same caliber. And now I read this one, I feel like it's just the same, where it's just like it's never been that caliber, and I just don't know why that is the case. I feel like there's just something missing about his first book that I read versus the other books I read from him. Not only that, but the characters in this book also were a little bit annoying. So some of the humors were great, I love the characters, but then I felt like the author just made them to the max level that it just got kind of irritating after a while, because there's only so much, you know, sarcasm and dry humor you can really consume, and this book just kind of like went way out there that I was just like, okay, like you need to tone it down a notch or two because it's getting a little too much. So that was like my biggest issue with this book, with the characters especially. But I don't know, I still really enjoyed it overall. I think the story itself was very compelling. I love how the adventure and the journey went, etc. But there's just something missing and I don't know what that is. The next book I picked up is Hooked, which I gave 2.5 stars. This is a retelling of Peter Pan, and this is also like a smut version of it. Again, people are lying when they say this is a smut. I don't think it was that smutty, to be quite honest. I think it was just okay. It's definitely smuttier than some of the other books, but it just wasn't the same expectations, I guess. I also didn't really care much for the story itself, the characters. Like, to be quite honest, it was kind of boring. So I don't know, I had really high expectations going into it because I just heard so many great things about it on social media, and it was just not it, guys. Next book I picked up was White Ivy by Susie Yang. This book I gave 2 stars. This book follows a woman called Ivy, where she is a thief and a liar. Originally, she was a Chinese immigrant living in a low-income apartment with her family, and her mother is considered as a tiger mom. She basically disapproved of everything, from her attitude to her clothes to her lifestyle, everything, etc., until she meets her grandmother Mei Feng, where she basically is the mentor that she needed to teach her everything. Fast forward to many years later, Ivy bumps into a childhood crush's sister, and now she's working hard to become the perfect woman for this childhood crush. But just when they start dating, there's another man who enters into Ivy's life who's also from her past but comes from a very different world, and now she's kind of torn between which world she wants to get into. I don't know, this book was okay. I feel like I had really high expectations in this book because it sounded so promising, but the execution was just not there, to be quite honest. I didn't care for Ivy. She was definitely not a likable character, and it definitely showed throughout this book. Not only that, but I felt like a lot of her like ambition, I don't know, I was not behind it. She had some questionable qualities about her, and I was not a fan, and that's what I can really say about this book. The next 9 books I read were Fairy Tale volumes 1 to 9, which I gave them all 5 stars. I did talk about this in one of my reading vlogs, so I'll link that above and down below if you just want to check that out. I read so much for that vlog, and all I can say is I adored the series. I love fairy tale anime to start off with, and I feel like after the series ended, I don't think it was a real conclusion. So now that the series, like the manga series, have completed, I'm going back into it and reading that manga series for this year. And I read the first 9 volumes in March, and I really enjoyed it. I just love the characters. I love Natsu, I love Lucy, I love Gray. I mean, they're all just such amazing characters. I definitely have not gotten super far from it because volume 9, like, we're still learning about the different characters and their relationship with each other, and you know, as the story progresses in the anime, like obviously their relationship, you know, changes as well, and right now we haven't gotten to that point. Like, we're still introducing a lot of characters that become vital later on in the series. So I'm super excited for the series and will definitely consume more throughout this year. The next book I picked up is The Spanish Love Deception by Elena Armas. This book I gave 4 stars. This book follows a woman called Catalina, where she basically lied to her entire family that she now has a boyfriend and will be inviting a said boyfriend to her sister's wedding in Spain. So now she has only a couple weeks before she can find someone, because she doesn't actually have a boyfriend, to come with her to this wedding, and enters her co-worker. His name is Aaron, where he is tall, handsome, and you know, basically everything she hates because of his personality. Surprisingly, he offered to step in and become her date and her fake boyfriend throughout all of this. And of course, in the beginning, she's like, no, I refuse. But then obviously she didn't really have a choice. So they end up, you know, going on this trip together, basically like a fake romance situation. And I really enjoyed this book. I don't see why everyone loves Aaron per se. I feel like I went into it expecting Aaron to be like the perfect boyfriend. That was not necessarily the case for me. I feel like he was a great boyfriend, don't get me wrong, but I don't know, I just did not feel the spark with him, I guess, compared to like a lot of other people. So this book I just gave 4 stars. I feel like it was great. I love the characters, I love the romance, but because I was like having like higher expectations, it just didn't, you know, meet that expectation, so it wasn't a 5-star read for me. The next 2 books I read are from a series, and that is Barbarian Alien as well as Barbarian Lover. For both of these I gave 4 stars. This is books 2 and books 3 in the Ice Planet Barbarian series, and I really enjoyed this series, guys. It is just a fun time, guys. There's really not much to it. The plot is just like there to have a plot, but it's really about the smut. So if you're really just going into it for smut purposes, this is the series to read. It's such a good palette cleanser where you just want to like zone out for a couple hours and then just read this book. I did listen to both of them on audio because they're only 6 hours, and I just read them on 2 times the speed, so it's only 3 hours for me. So I basically finished one book like a day, just for a couple hours, like an afternoon, when I'm just running some errands or when I'm trying to cook some stuff. Like, it just goes by like that because it is just fun, guys. There's just really not a lot of substance to this book overall. It's just a fun time, and that's all there really is to it. Next book I picked up is You Deserve Each Other by Sarah Hoggle. This book I gave 4 stars. This book was an interesting read. It basically follows Naomi as well as her fiance Nicholas, where they're engaged, set to be married soon, but for some reason they do not like each other. So the issue right now is that they've already put in a bunch of deposits, so neither of them really wants to be the one to, you know, call the wedding, because whoever calls the wedding has to foot the deposit bill, and there's a lot of pride involved here. I don't know, the premise sounded questionable, to be quite honest, but somehow the execution was done really well. I really enjoyed this book. I love the banter, I love the dynamic, I love the pranks that they were doing with each other, and then seeing the characters kind of realize that, you know what, at the end of the day, like, we still love each other, even though there are times when we just don't like each other, which is fair. I don't think in a relationship you like that person or love that person like consistently, because they'll do things and say things sometimes that it just pisses you off and you're just like, I don't like you at this point, which is understandable. So it was just really fun to just read this book and just seeing it from their perspectives. Like, you know what, I hate you, but like I don't hate you. And honestly, I feel like this is very one-sided, by the way. Like, I'm pretty sure it was just the girl who was just like not liking the guy, and the guy is just trying to do whatever he can, but because he felt like he wasn't seen and like heard, he just kind of like, you know, backed up and put into his shell there and just kind of like hope for the best. And then for the girl, she's like just passive aggressive about it. I don't know, it was just a fun time, guys. It was, all I can say is a fun time. That's all I can say. Next book I picked up is My Lovely Wife by Samantha Downing. This book I gave 4 stars. This book follows a married couple. Specifically, it follows the husband's perspective, where they're just like any other couple with 2 kids. The issue is that the 2 of them have a secret, and that is they are hiding dead bodies. This was such a fascinating read. I want to know what was happening. So because this book follows the husband's perspective, it was very one-sided. You never really understood what the wife was thinking and like her take on things. And I don't know, the whole thing was just like them scouting out females. The guy was doing all scouting, and then the wife would actually go and do the offing, and then the husband would just be like, okay, is everything done? Sounds great, you know, like things like that. And it wasn't always that the case. And the book kind of follows like, you know, before it happened, like when it first started, and then what kind of transpired after that, and just what, like, you know, how they continued doing it throughout the book. And this was a wild ride, guys. I really enjoyed the suspense. I really enjoy learning everything and uncovering everything. Definitely super fascinating. I can't say the ending was a complete surprise, because it wasn't. I always felt like the relationship was a little one-sided to me in terms of the murders that they were doing, because, you know, for me, I'm just like, you're only doing half of it, and yes, she's only doing half of it too. But if I am like I feel like if you're going to commit murders, you want to be on top of like the entire process, right? Like, you can't just leave it, half of it, to someone else entirely, even though that's someone you completely trust. But it's like, for your own safety too, it's like you kind of want to know the process. And I feel like the husband did not do that, nor did the wife, to be quite honest. And so I don't know, I feel like it was just bound to have issues. Not only that, but the ending was kind of like vague too. When the ending happened, I was like, wait, what? So anyways, highly recommend this thriller if you're looking for something very, very different. So the next book I picked up is Sleeping Giants by Sylvain Noël. This book I gave 5 stars. This book was so fucking good. This book basically follows a woman, a little girl, her name is Rose Franklin, where one day, I think she was like 5 or 10 years old, something like that, and she's riding her new little bicycle, and she's going around in the forest. I don't know why the fuck she's riding a bicycle in the forest anyways, and she falls through the earth. She wakes up with, you know, the police on top of her, or not on top of her, but like above her, because she falls into a hole, and she finds out that she actually fallen into this giant robotic hand. Fast forward many years later, she's now a scientist, and she's now tasked with overseeing this team to kind of discover what is this hand, what's behind it, what is going on, is it like aliens, like what's happening. And I really enjoyed this book. I felt like this book, even though it was a little slow, I was super invested. Like, there was just something about this book that I was like, it just sucked me right in. I was just immersed with everything that was happening. I really wanted to know like the characters and like the story itself. Like, the plot was super fascinating. I was like, what is happening? What is this robotic hand? You know, is there someone out there? And if so, like, what is their objective? And why was his hand just left here like this? Like, what is happening? I had so many questions reading this book, guys, and as of right now, I did actually manage to finish the series, and I can say that this was my favorite book in the series. So just a little spoiler alert for my April wrap-up that I'll do obviously next month. But yeah, like, I really enjoyed this book, guys. It was just such a good read. If you're looking for a good sci-fi novel, check out this one. Then the next two books I picked up is a series, and that is It Happened One Summer, as well as Hook, Line, and Sinker by Tessa Bailey. I gave both books 5 stars. This is the type of romance that I was expecting. I really enjoyed both books, like, from beginning to end. I love the characters, I love the plot, the romance is fucking adorable. But if I had to pick one over the other, I did like It Happened One Summer just a little bit more compared to this one. I don't know why. I just love the dynamics between like that gruff guy and the girl who's like, you know, this LA socialite. Like, I was just here for that. And then this book just kind of follows a sister as well as another gruff fisherman, or like a crab man. I don't know how you call it. It is a fisherman, right? Yeah, it's a crab fisherman. So yeah, like, I just love the dynamics between the two of them. It's also like a lot of like small town vibes, and this was so fucking good. Now I need to go and read more books from her, because honestly, I have read more books from her. I forget which series I read from her previously, but oh, Fix Her Up, that's the one I read from her. That one was just okay. So I was pleasantly surprised by how much I enjoyed this series. So if you're looking for a great like romance series, definitely check out this one. Then the last and final book that I have on here is Upgrade by Blake Crouch. This book I gave 3 stars. I really wish I gave this book a higher rating, because I think this was probably my least favorite Blake Crouch book as of yet, and this is the 3rd book I've read from him. This book basically follows a guy called Logan, where I want to say he's like a soldier or like somewhere in the military type of field, and one day he's hit with some sort of like attack where at first he's like, what the hell's happening? He gets kind of sick, but then he gets better. But then he realizes that his body has changed. He's a little faster, his, you know, a little smarter, his thinking's faster. Basically his entire body has upgraded, and now he's trying to figure out like what is happening to him, what is the purpose behind it, and why is there a connection between that and his mother. And as the story progresses, you kind of learn more about the history of his mother, and you know, what her goals were, as well as like what the purpose of this upgrade is, and how he plays a role in all of this. I don't know, I feel like this book was good. It definitely started off really strong, but then about like a quarter in or like halfway into the book, it started to kind of like die down a bit, and then I was just not as invested in the story anymore. I still wanted to know what was happening, just because I was like, at this point I just curious, but I didn't have that same drive like I did in the beginning of the book. So I don't know, this is suddenly a book where this beginning was great, the ending was not so great. So anyways, I have to say for this video, these are all the books I read for the month of March. As you can clearly see, I read a shit ton of amazing books, which is awesome, and I am excited to see how April goes. As of right now, I've only read a couple books, but it's still early days of April, so I have lots to go. But I do have a trip coming up soon, so I don't know really how much reading I've yet done during that trip. We'll see. But yeah, let me know down below if you have read any of these books before, and if you have, what did you guys think about them? But as always, if you like this video, please do give me a thumbs up. It really does help out my channel. And if you like to see more content of me, please don't hesitate to subscribe down below, as well as hit the notification bell. And as always, don't forget to follow me on Twitter and Instagram, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye.